Hi again, everybody. Continuing on with Chapter 30, I've skipped Chapter 30 sections 2 and 3 because these are simply charts that are giving you the various relationships between a lot of the pronouns, adjectives, and adverbs we've been learning in the last chapters. Shelmerdine does just as good of an explanation as I could, really, so I'll leave that be. But we will pick up here now in Section 4, which discusses conditional, relative, and temporal clauses. So the key here is that we're combining conditions, which we've known, which always have an A in them, right, so far, or sometimes an aon, which we recognize as a combination of a plus the particle on. Both of these are particles. So we've got these two if clauses, and that's what was making things conditional. But now we're going to see if we can replace these with relatives or kind of temporal expressions to establish not if but when, or not if but who or whomever. This is actually pretty easy to do, and this gets back to something I've been telling the students in my live class, is that a lot of these conditions that Shelmerdine is presenting as, almost a divine fiat, right, as something that there's a future more vivid and a future less vivid, and they pair in these ways. That's not really what it's all about. If we get back to what a condition is about, we've got a protasis and an apodosis. These are fancy Greek words. To me, they always sound like different dinosaur breeds, right? Protosaurus, Apodopoulos, I don't know. Well, that's a Greek name. I don't know what I'm saying. Point being, protasis and apodosis is the key thing to take away from all of these conditions. The protasis is the if. It sets up the conditions when the apodosis will happen. And we can imagine if we can replace this if with something like when. At what time? At that time. When I'm finished teaching my classes for the spring, then I will start thinking about my summer break. That sort of relationship. It's not if, it's when. So it's a little bit stronger than an if, but we can see that this protasis, the conditions that kind of lead to the apodosis, that relationship is maintained. So that's the temporal, and then the relative, we can kind of talk about things in a more general sense. Whoever brings the gifts to the goddess, that person will do these other things. Again, we can kind of establish these relationships between protasis and apodosis. So let's look at Shelmerdine's primary example, because she's showing the various ways that we can replace a protasis, a standard if clause, with one of these conditional relatives. So let's do it with this. It's the English sentence. We've got one English sentence that we're going to translate 3 ways into Greek. Whoever does not obey the laws is bad. So what's our protasis and what's our apodosis in this English sentence? So again, the protasis is the condition, the if. And again, we won't have if here because we're abandoning the a and the aon. That's what we're looking at. But it's going to be this whoever does not obey the laws. That's setting up the circumstance. And then we're going to have the kind of result, the thing that follows from the condition. So this is our protasis, and let me pick another color then for our apodosis. Is bad. So what can we say about the relationship between this protasis and this apodosis? Whoever does not obey the laws is bad. So is bad, present tense, indicative. So we can write that out, present, indicative. This means we're not going to be in a future condition. Whoever does not obey the laws in the future will be bad. So this is going to be something that's present tense. Whoever, this ever, gives us a sense that this is a general condition. We're not talking about one certain person, but we're saying as a rule, as a general rule, whoever does not obey the laws is a bad person. So what we've got here is a present general condition. And again, these names are made up by linguists. They're very useful. They describe a lot of the circumstances that we'll see, but you might not always see something that counts as a present general, and things can get replaced. We can slot in. We're putting in a different kind of protasis here, a relative protasis, versus a kind of standard apodosis. That's all fine. We just need to get used to kind of thinking a little bit more creatively, a little bit outside of the box, even though the charts that we've been given that list future more vivid, future less vivid, present general, past general are useful. So now let's look at some of these English or Greek translations, and this is also going to be a great opportunity to, as always, focus on breathing and accent. So hos, note that that has a rough breathing. This is how we can tell it's a relative pronoun. On, smooth breathing. Why are both of these accented with a grave accent, one that goes down? Well, they're followed by other words, and they're accented on their last syllable. There's only one syllable, so it's not really an issue, but when you have a final syllable that's accented followed by another word that's not enclitic, we're going to get an acute. Sorry, we're going to get a grave. If it's enclitic, we get an acute, but that's not the point. So whoever. And what's on doing here? We've seen on do a number of things. In the aon conditions, which were either future more vivid or present general, as we have here, this was adding to the general nature of it. This was removing it from the indicative a little bit more, saying, well, whoever. So we've got that there. That's what it's functioning here. May. Why do we have may here, not oo? Well, remember that in conditions, in the protasis, you always use may, not oo or ook or whatever form that's going to be. So that's why we have it here, because this is functionally a protasis. Whoever does not pay thetai. So this is tricky on its own. It's worth paying attention to. If you look up in the dictionary, you're going to find patho, to persuade. But this isn't an active ending. What kind of ending is this? Well, you'll look at the tie and say, oh yeah, my, psi, tie. Although, note that most of the time, psi is not going to look like that, because that intervocalic sigma is going to drop out, and then we'll get contraction. But this my, psi, tie is a great way to look at primary tense. So that's present, future, perfect, those kind of endings, primary tense, passive, or more appropriately often middle. So here we have the middle, pathomai. And what did pathomai mean? Well, it means to persuade yourself to obey. So whoever does not obey the laws, and remember that pathomai takes a dative object, or what we call the dative object. Why this eta here? Well, that's a lengthened thematic vowel. This is showing us that we're in the subjunctive mood. If this were indicative, it would be pathetai. But by lengthening it, we're showing that we're in the subjunctive. Subjunctive, which is always primary, giving us this tie ending. So whoever does not persuade himself to obey, that's basically what we mean. Whoever does not obey the laws is bad. Perfect. Why do we have this acute accent on the end of kakos? Shouldn't it be grave like hos and on? Well, no, because esti is enclitic. We've had that for a little while. Sorry for that little move. Esti is enclitic. Why do we have the new movable? Well, it's at the end of a sentence. That's exactly where new movable would be used, or before a vowel. So this is exactly what we would expect. Whoever does not persuade himself to obey the laws, or herself, is bad. Whoever does not obey the laws is bad. Let's look at our example number 2. I can write numbers in front of this. 1, 2. Hostis. Look how the on has dropped out, because we are in tis now. We're using tis. Because tis in itself is indefinite. It's general. It's general by its very meaning. Whoever does not obey the laws is bad. Note that we've got pathetai here. What does that mean? Well, pathetai was subjunctive. This is indicative. Why? Because we're taking care of all of the kind of subjunctive nature, the general nature that this present general condition wants with hostis. Hostis takes care of it all. We're still in a protasis, that's why we use may, but the tis is taking care of it so that we don't need absolutely a subjunctive. Everything else is the same. Now we get to number 3, and we see the on has returned, because it doesn't hurt to be a little bit redundant on some of these general things. This is, of all of the sentences here, this is the most general, because we're not only using an indefinite pronoun, hostis, and definite relative pronoun, hostis, we're also using the subjunctive plus on. So you'll see these two links. If you've got a subjunctive, you'll have on. If you're kind of replacing just the relative pronoun with an indefinite relative, you can forget about the subjunctive altogether. But here we see both combined. Whoever, ever, we might say, does not obey the laws is bad. Everything else is the same. All right, so that's an interesting way to think about this. I like the example because we get three very similar sentences. Obviously, they all translate the same in English, but different ways of doing the same thing in Greek, and we're getting to this general nature. So there are other, there's future more vivid, future less vivid, past general, contrary to fact. I'm not interested in all of those. I'm going to just go over two more examples from Shelmerdine, and this is on page 209 of her introduction to Greek. So, hotan elthe strateosomen. All right. Whenever he comes, we will march. This is the translation. Let's make sense of that. So, hotan, what is that? Well, that's hote, if you read through Shelmerdine, she explains this, plus on. Note that on, this is the second time we've seen on want to combine with words. We've also seen it already with a plus on, turning into aon, right? I guess I should remove the breathing there because it's no longer the beginning of the word aon. We also will see this with a few other words like a paid on, but this is fine. Hote plus on for now. So what do we have? We've got on. So when we're thinking about, oh, this is a protasis, if this were equivalent to aon, which it's functioning similarly, we'd be saying, okay, this is going to give us two options, either future more vivid or present general. And if it's future more vivid, we'll have a future verb. So let me make some things clear. We're talking about a protasis here with the on, and this will be the apodosis. And this is just, again, these things don't need to operate always together, that you'll have a future more vivid hote on plus a future verb. You should think about these things as operating separately, but when they come together, they'll have a specific translation in English, and that's really what we want to capture. And that's why the chart that Shelmerdine gives us and the names, future more vivid, is useful. And if it's a present general, we'll just get a present verb. I should say on the future verb, Shelmerdine loves to point out, and rightfully so, that there could be equivalents here of futurity. Verbs like day, it's necessary, it will be necessary. We could see that sort of thing. All right, well, that's good. So now we need to say, well, our reading expectations are well set up. Hote plus on, when, and then whenever. And we're going to be looking for one of these. Elthe, I should have said the whole time, the verb in the protasis is going to be subjunctive. If we have an on, we've got subjunctive. So we have that right here. What form of the subjunctive is elthe? This is everyone's favorite, I'm sure, verb, right? Erkomai. You say, how do you get elthon, which is the third principle. Apart from erkomai, it's just the reason that you got to learn your principal parts. So note that this is deponent. Erkomai, to go, has a passive ending, middle passive ending, but has an active meaning. Same in the future, eleosomai. Note these my endings, primary tense endings, eleosomai, accent, over the upsilon. And then the aorist, and this is augmented aorist, is elthon. So if we were to actually get to the aorist stem, it's simply elf, E-L, theta. All right, great. And that's what we've got here with a third person singular subjunctive ending. So this is aorist subjunctive, which means what? One time, simple aspect, not past time. We're dealing in the subjunctive of the aorist purely with aspect. And why doesn't it have a kind of more, why doesn't it have an alpha, a sigma? That's because this is a strong, or what's also sometimes called the second aorist subjunctive. So whenever he comes, we will march. So in English, we put this comma there. Editors of Greek sometimes will, sometimes won't. You can see, this is a 3-word sentence in Greek that it takes 6 words in English to translate. This is kind of more optional. You can just tell from the structure of the sentence in Greek than it is for us. But strateosomen, nice primary thematic vowel ending, amen. Sigma here, that's not alpha, so this is not going to be an aorist, and we're missing a past indicative augment anyway. This is clearly future. We will march. So yeah, I mean, you all have been cheating. You've had the translation here the whole time. But it's nice to break these things down. Whenever he comes, we will march. So future verb, future more vivid, is what we're looking at. A protasis with subjunctive plus on, and an apodosis with a future verb. Now, whenever he should come, we would march. What has happened here? I've kind of chiastically arranged the word order, right? A, B, B, A. Greek, English, English, Greek. Whenever he should come, we would march. So what we're saying, what's the difference between will and would? Well, it's one of probability. Same with should. What we're saying here is that this is less likely, or as linguists will call it, less vivid. We're still talking about the future, but this one was more of a sure bet. Now we've gotten a little bit more fuzzy. This fuzziness is expressed in the apodosis with the optative plus on. And you remember from independent uses of the optative plus on, this is a potential. Sorry, not potential. What is the term for that? No, actually, it is potential, because this is a potential optative. Sorry, sometimes Latin gets in the way. It's a potential subjunctive in Latin. But we got a potential optative here. Might happen. And then look what we've got in our protasis for a future less vivid, an FLV condition. Future less vivid. In our protasis, we're going to get an optative, no on, and just a simple A. So here the A has been replaced by hote. We've got a when instead of an if. But we don't have the on tacked on because we don't need it. We're not working with the subjunctive in the protasis. So it's going to be A plus the optative, and then in the apodosis, optative plus on. Great. And that's exactly what we have. Whenever he comes. So what form of the optative of this? Again, this is a strong second aorist, and then it says optative. Optative, secondary ending, third person singular. Whenever he should come, we would, that's a typo, there should be no alpha there. Strateusimen, the ending's right, that's the more important thing. We would march, optative plus on, a kind of potential optative, the apodosis of this future less vivid condition. So let's summarize. This is section 4, chapter 30, and we're looking at conditional, relative, and temporal clauses, and we're saying they're conditional because they're following a protasis-apodosis form. They have that essence of condition, but we're dropping the A or the A on from the equation, and we're replacing the A with either a relative, like hos, or a temporal word, like hote, when. So here we had our whoever, and we said that this was very generalized, and that's why we could use the indefinite relative, but you could also just use the straight-up relative with a subjunctive plus on. You could also, as in example 3, really double down on the general nature of this protasis and say whoever ever does not obey the laws is bad. We have may throughout because we're dealing with a protasis, and to negate a protasis in Greek, it's always may. It's not oo or ook. That was great. And then we moved into our future more vivid, future less vivid pairing. More vivid, of course, takes the subjunctive in the protasis and a future verb or equivalent in the apodosis. That's exactly what we have. But note how hote has combined with on, just like a combines with on, to create this general situation which pairs with the subjunctive verb. In the future less vivid, we basically have a potential optative protasis. We might march, and then whenever he should come. So these are the standard ways. This is not really how I speak in modern English, modern American vernacular English, but it is the way that most of these textbooks will work. Should, would are a nice way to do the protasis versus apodosis of a future less vivid. Whenever he should come, whenever, and note that the ever here is kind of contained. I mean, we might just say when he should come. There's nothing really indefinite about this, but the should is the really operative part here. We've got althoi, we don't know. So whenever he should come, then we would march, but that's not necessarily likely. All right, well, that does it for chapter 30. I'll have some exercises coming up in the next lesson or next video, and we'll see you, I hope, there. Take care.